All those
Give me your
moments
answer.
to be lost in time.
To infinity and beyond.
Like tears
The love of
in rain.
All right, welcome back to the Analog Sci-Fi Book Review podcast. So it is middle of February. It's February 12th, and it is a nice snowy day. We've gotten about 4 or 5 snow days here in Maryland, and I was originally thinking about reading and breaking down all 3 of the Foundation trilogy, but because of the snow and kind of the sense of isolation on top of what's going on in the world, I thought I'd switch it up and read Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. Now, this book has wanted to find its way into my life. And I guess the way to say that is the idea of the book, or in the title and just the whole narrative itself, was introduced to me in high school. I think I might have been in 10th grade at the time. And my drama teacher suggested this book because she knew that I was an avid sci-fi reader. I must have been reading something that was pulpy or something that necessarily wasn't as thoughtful as this book. So she pitched it to me. If you're an avid sci-fi reader, just in a kind of a one sentence, we follow a competent man archetype as he more or less tries to bring forward a new planet into a federation of planets called the Ekman, and there's about 80 of them. When we meet Ganglii, the envoy to the planet, and he speaks on behalf of the Ekman, kind of like a Star Trek Federation of Planets kind of thing. And he comes down to Gethen to introduce that people, that planet of people, to that Federation of Planets, that they can get access to new technologies and essentially become kind of part of the neighborhood, essentially, which is inherently interesting to me on that basis. And then she told me what I guess is kind of not the meat and the potatoes, but more or less probably what Ursula K. Le Guin wanted to talk about into the story outside of something that's kind of 60s Star Trek, kumbaya. All of the races are represented and treated equally, that kind of like 60s utopia narrative. But what raised my eyebrows, and just even probably 15 or 16 at the time, was that the story that the planet inhabitants were androgynous, or didn't have a fixed gender, and that through the month that they would switch from being male and female. And I guess in a bit of a way, she suggested it to me because it would intrigue me, but it also, I think she knew that it would enlighten me. And I think that's the one thing, if you're going to stop this video very quickly, the biggest thing you can do in reading this is to come away and challenge your gender norms, because I think that's mainly what this book is about and why it's in such high esteem. It was written in 1969, and if anyone's a fan of Mad Men, the end of the 60s, was very tumultuous, and there were a lot of cultural events, MLK's death, Stonewall, a whole bunch of stuff. And this kind of just fits nicely right onto the shelf into that timeline of the public consciousness. And so younger Alex is intrigued by the book. And I must have bought it, this is probably my second copy, and the one I actually read. I had probably gotten a copy at Barnes & Noble at college, and had read the first 2 chapters, and found the kind of sing-songy lyrical, poetic kind of writing style that Ursula K. Le Guin has. A little not challenging, but not necessarily what I was intending. And I guess in if anyone is becoming a fan of Analog Sci-Fi Book Review podcast, the main reason outside of just talking about the books and deconstructing them is also to come at it from a guy who knew that he wanted to read a lot of sci-fi books as a young, not just young adult, but young boy or teenager and such. And then, finding myself a bit, mystified at the story and not necessarily taking it in and appreciating it for what it is. So, I guess in a very classic sense, writing the book in your mind versus, actually experiencing it from, what the author's intent is. So, that was my reading the first few chapters, not necessarily getting it, not necessarily knowing where the characters are and what's going on, which, sounds kind of silly, but if you've actually read it all the way through, you'll get what I mean. It's a very dense book. It's a book that jumps around and moves to kind of paint a very large picture. And I guess in that way, and it moves around and we follow not a whole bunch, many characters, but we're our point of view lens jumps around in a lot of ways. And a very easy, I guess, pulpy, popular thing to compare it to is something like Watchmen, the comic, because the comic kind of jumps around too. And I'll get to it. There's a bit of a narrative within a narrative that's happening. That's pretty interesting. But I guess to backtrack a little bit, so the overall, I've kind of gotten into a little bit of the summary, but so we follow Genglei, who is the first envoy for the Ecumen, and he lands on Gethen, which is a snow planet, and it's not there's not a lot of vegetation. I think it snows probably most of the year. And so it's a society that's made the best of things. When we meet the people inside their homes, even though that they're very comfortable, they've almost evolved in a way to make do with less. And they're very tradition based. So even though maybe they have adequate clothing, they'll still hold to rituals that are much more akin to when they were, not cavemen, but more primitive and not the advanced society that they are. Even though it's cold, they're doing pretty okay. And on this planet, there are two factions, and in 69, it's clearly kind of like a Cold War thing, where one's the United States and one's, the Soviet Russia, and you can kind of see parallels in how they kind of deal with their politics. But that's not necessarily how I read it. In doing research, that's what I've come to the conclusion of. But you if you're, I guess, a millennial reading it for the first time, the view is, at least for me, could be something akin to like the Athenians and the Spartans. Like two rivaling factions, probably on some kind of geographical divide, which I believe is just like snow cover or mountains. And so we have, there's so much preamble to this story. And when I get to the actual plot, the plot I feel like is so thin, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's just, the story to me is more or less about kind of these. All right, so here's these stack of stones, and then here's these stack of stones, and then how's these stack of stones, and all of those stones, make a story. And if you were just to look at it from like, oh well, here's this, is it a story about gender norms and a planet that has androgynous people that flex from back and forth? Well, yeah. Oh, is it a story about friendship and two individuals who don't see eye to eye and then do. Like, yeah. Is it about dualism and politics and war? Yeah, it's also that. And all of these kind of like totems come together to make to me the left hand of darkness. And so let me just kind of wrap around. So Ganglii comes in. He's landed on the planet. He's the envoy for the Ecumen. He's been there for about a year. He's not necessarily assimilated when we first meet him. He's been seeking audience with the king because I'm just gonna say the Athenian faction, which is Karhide, which is, I believe, probably where most of the book takes place. It's like 2 continents subdivided. So we start off with Karhide. They're having this kind of big celebration. I believe the season's changing and they're moving to spring. And Ganglii has befriended kind of like, I guess, a statesman in a way. A Gethen named Estervan. And again, I just feel like there's only 2 characters in the whole book. There are sub characters that the 2 characters interact with, but they're really the only 2 characters we interact with because they're really the only ones that get narration chapters where we truly see it from their point of view. So Ganglii, in this carnival changing the season, his statesman friend Estervan comes in and says, "Oh, we're going to have an audience with the king," which is Ganglii's main goal on being on the planet. To speak to the powers that be, the monarch, and basically invite them to be a part of the Ecumen Federation. So Estervan brings Ganglii to the king, and it's a moment of deep racism, but I for some reason find it to be a very it's one of the key moments. It's not a very dialogue heavy book, but it's one of the key moments that just sits with me. And I guess in being a heteronormative cis white male, I don't experience a lot of direct bigotry or racism. So, when I can see something that, I can see a parallel, adjacent to a friend of mine or someone that I know. Ganglii is written to be very dark. He's written to be a black gentleman, African descent, whatever you want to say. And he's coming to the king, and he's been there for a year. He's aware that the culture is different. That there's two genders, but for the most part, say out of 30 days of the year, 25 out of the days, they're the Gethen people are completely genderless, and then 5 days out of the year they assume a gender and can procreate. So he as kind of representing a progressive, competent man point of view, where, well, I mean, this is a positive society, it's not all white men, that there's probably a level of equality within the Ecumen, especially since there are multiple planets. So, we could totally see Ganglii viewed as a liberal or a progressive. I'm good. I'm a good guy. And it's interesting. It's interesting to write that character because it's, I think, very easily to maybe editorially force the character to be white, because you're deconstructing that archetype. What better archetype to deconstruct in this feminist science fiction narrative than a white man. But I think it's thoughtful to make him a black man, because he comes at it with his own preconceived notions, and he looks at the people as strange, when maybe he shouldn't have to, or maybe he shouldn't. and that the people are okay, and the way they are is okay. Maybe in the same way that, progressives or liberals might have thought about gay people in the 90s. And, people eating their words, saying things that maybe sounded right at the time that don't make any sense now. Like, I don't see race, or I don't see color. Doesn't make any damn sense. And having Gangly Eye as the point of view character, I think, supports that. But in a roundabout way, and I feel like having to preload that, there's a line in the book that is so shocking that it just rests with me. So Gangly Eye spends a year trying to get an audience with the king. The king's a big jerk. And after saying a few things, he says a line in a bit of his introduction, because Gangly is black, and he, in that small planet, he hasn't been outside, probably the solar system or such, and says something to the effect of, "Are they as black as you are in the void?" Which is just so damn shocking that, even because what it communicates to me is that even in this case where we look at the Gethenians and see them being so fundamentally different than probably any other race of beings in the galaxy. No one procreates or does the things that the Gethenians are, and they're so fundamentally different that they even have prejudices, and that's not okay, and that's not that racism could transcend galaxies, and how offensively interesting that is. And I think if you do read that, and you do read the book, you do come away with some of these understandings of kind of like, maybe racism isn't something that is exclusive to this planet, and how fucking sad is that? And that's something that I think that gets deconstructed a little bit, on the periphery, but is at the sun, is in the book. Let me wrap my head around. So Gangly Eye has the audience with the king. He does not accept Gangly Eye's invitation to be a part of the Ecumen, and I think just tells him to follow up later. But then he ends up extraditing Estervan to the other faction. So it's Karhide and Ogren. Ogren is the other faction. Like I said, I would think of them as Spartan. I think they're standing for Soviet Russia. They're a little bit more militant in a way. But I guess I'll stop at that bit there, because again, it's not really about the narrative, because I feel like everything is a vehicle for Ursula K. Le Guin to dissect things. So if in calling it the left hand of darkness, we have Gangly Eye, who is universally masculine. He's a man. He has man characteristics. He thinks like a man. He's logical. He's rational. Positive male characteristics. But he also embodies kind of negative male characteristics. He's distant. He's not communicative. Things that maybe are the downside of maleness. and the long and the short of it is, and here kind of in the middle of discussing it is, if Gangly Eye didn't have all of the baggage and all of the garbage that comes with being a man, would the story be as long as it is? Would he just move quickly through it and effectively, bring the Ecumen into the fold, without any bloodshed or without any calls to war or tension? Because and to kind of dissect it, because this is really what the book's about, is a kind of a fundamental question of where does war come from? Where do politics come from? Where do all of these, not necessarily, I guess negative things that are they inherent? If gender went away, would war not exist? If there wasn't male aggression, would there be no war? If there wasn't a dualist in the in genders, would there not be the kind of politics that we see on Earth? And that's where Ursula K. Le Guin comes in. She comes in with a very new wave, coming off the back of second wave feminism, and looking at science fiction from a lens not necessarily of blasters and space adventures, but really kind of like trying to look at the human condition and saying, okay, here's us. Here's our thing over here. Here's our planet. What if there was a planet over here that did this? And we took out these things, like gender, like pretty much take gender out. And would you, what would anything fill the vacuum, or would these things just not take care of themselves, but just not rear their head the way war rears its head, or ugly politics rears its head. But the other main concept that needs to be kind of addressed is how the Gethenians describe even their pronouns. You have to think, written in 1969 and kind of where we are here now in 2021 with newly constructed pronouns, them, they, them, zer, all of those things. Though maybe I don't have a full grasp and understanding, I feel like all of those things would be at home right here in this book. And I think if anyone coming from, as silly as it sounds, from a straight white guy, I think anyone who has a non-binary pronoun, or is part of the LGBTQ community, really might want to read this book. I'm not sure if they'll immediately embrace it, but it just comes from a place that's so interesting, and maybe they'll find something that feels like home. And I know that when I read it, it was allowing myself to look at some of my my gender norms, and really wonder like how my maleness gets in the way of conveying my ideas. That if my male ego, stepped aside for a second, people could actually understand me. And I think that's something that, on the right hand of light, someone like myself who would read this could probably take away something, on the same level of someone that maybe was part of a non-binary or part of the LGBTQ community, because, it's the left hand shaking the right in a lot of ways. It's a story about dualism. It's a story about friendship. Gangli and Estervin go on an adventure, coming back from breaking out. Let me just circle back on that. So Estervin gets taken to the other side, and I don't feel like we're there for very long. And that's also where I want to read the story more, because I just feel like nothing really happens in the story, and that all, like I've said before, the totems are more or less what I feel like are the story. There are chapters that break up the Estervin and Gangli chapters, and those are these mystic, floating heads, anthropological post narratives of like what had happened or what was going to happen, or how the Gethenians came about. Yeah, this falls under in the Hainish cycle. This is book number 4. So following the Ecumen's journey, I plan to read the other ones. I don't probably plan to read any Ursula K. Le Guin again anytime soon. Though I find her or at least this book, to be very engaging. I don't necessarily want to probably read more than 1 or 2 of her books a year, probably because they're so dense, from what my understanding is. So Esterven gets taken into the other side of the continent, to the Spartan Overin continent, where he's exiled. See, even now I'm thinking about it, where I'm like, I'm using pronouns because it's like, it's Esterven in being a Gethen. We actually see the change, and the pronouns change, and we see the gender switch, which is initially very shocking to Ganglii. So we find ourselves back at the Overin jail, and that's when we realize that Ganglii has been kidnapped. So he's kidnapped, put in a jail, and Esterven breaks him out. And then they make a long journey back to Karhide. And once they get to Karhide, Esterven is shot and killed because he's still, extradited out of Karhide. And basically on that, sad note, and that the two sides are practically going to war, Ganglii gets a invitation to speak to the king, and more or less, the spaceship lands, and Ganglii's mission is a success. And that's pretty much where the book ends. But I guess there was one other thing I wanted to kind of come about that happens right before the journey. Is Ganglii is set his path on meeting a few of these like fortune seers, and they have this interesting kind of philosophy, which is they answer questions, but their like modus operandi is to answer questions so that you realize the important ones, and not ask silly ones. And someone like myself, I guess I understand the value of that, in that you're never really going to get to a full truth unless you really know how to ask the right question. And that if you ask a bad question or a wrong question, well, of course you're going to get a wrong answer. So Ganglii asks the fortune tellers if the Gethenians are going to be a part of the Ecumen Federation in the next 5 years. And they say yes. So Ganglii is sent on his way, feeling empowered that he's, going to be successful. He just doesn't necessarily know at what cost. And he's still holding on to a lot of these kind of more masculine concepts. And so Ganglii is left with a successful mission. He gets what he wants, but you get a sense that he's kind of felt like he's lost something, in befriending Esterven. Esterven doesn't necessarily fully, I think, experience, the complete man that Ganglii becomes at the end of the story. Through his experience with Esterven and their journey together, I believe Ganglii, and it's not, I don't feel like it's like just like, I'm a better guy. It's very subtle, and that's why I also want to read it again. Is that I feel like his journey isn't like he he does something and you feel like, oh, that was a great big growth, spurt for Gangly Eye. I see it where it's progressing, is that it's step by step. He understands the culture of the Gethenians, from a sentient being to sentient being. You get the sense that he loved Estervan, and that his death was a big deal to him, and that if he had it the other way, Estervan's still alive, and that's not necessarily the story I expected. I read this incomplete, or I read this to completion. When me and my wife, the week after we got married, we headed up to New Orleans, and we headed on a Amtrak. And so I brought this copy that I had gotten from a secondhand store, knowing that, I needed to have a few books that were pretty dense and that were going to occupy my time. And so, in about a day or two, I had finished it. And it was just left with this, feeling of loss from Estervan's death. The feeling that, the Gethenians were going to be able to teach their ways to the Gethenian, or to the Ecumen, in the way that they seem to be a lot more of a spiritual race. They seem to be a lot more connected. They didn't seem like they were very materialistic, and so in that way, the Ecumen needed their left-handed darkness, in a way, where if their dualism, maybe is too much of a rational mind, they needed to find kind of a spiritual partner to bring them to a level of understanding that can bring them balance. And that's the other factor, is that balance. And so, if you read the book, you should read it in a sense that, how can you, if you're a bodybuilder and if you're super masculine, maybe you should look at yourself and wanna wonder how can I balance that equation with some feminine characteristics. And it's not necessarily about being girly. If you're super masculine, super tough guy, are you emotional? If you're a female and you're more emotional, you're in a positive way, where you connect with people and you're present. That's great, but it wouldn't be a bad thing to know how something works, because that's something that doesn't necessarily come, intuitive to you. And so if you have two hands, it makes it a stronger hold. And I think that's something that you could take away into all aspects of your life. Something that you're naturally good at, fine. But maybe you need to learn something that you're not naturally good at to balance out that equation. And that's something that I feel like is, comes in spades into the story, and is basically my biggest takeaway outside of, fully experiencing the book and coming at it from a different point of view, from its deconstruction of gender norms, and just a very interesting, thought-provoking narrative of what would it take. What if the space aliens came in right now and gave us a list of things that we needed to do, or we were so different from them that we couldn't communicate, and that was going to stop us from getting our ticket to come and be a part of the planetary neighborhood in a way. So I'm really glad a book like this exists. I really am, and I think anyone that is looking for something that is rich in thought-provoking ideas, The Left-Handed Darkness is kind of where you should go. If you're a science fiction guy, and you've gone through the classics, but maybe this wasn't necessarily something that was on your radar. I mean, when it comes to the Left-Handed Darkness, I mean, it definitely gets 2 big thumbs up for me.
All those
Give me your
moments.
And that was Ursula K. Le Guin's Left-Handed Darkness.
Time.